welcome to Australia in Space TV. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the executive editor with the Australia in Space magazine. Welcome to a special episode. We've got Krystal Azelton, Director, Space Applications Programs, Chair, Summit for Space Sustainability. She's with the Secure World Foundation and I think streaming in from the US. Without further ado, Krystal Azelton. Krystal, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Chris. Nice to be here.
Great. Now we're going to talk about the outcomes from the Summit for Space Sustainability, and the title here is The Why of Space Sustainability. I think that's a key aspect, and there's a lot happening within this domain. Maybe just a brief background about your role. It looks quite interesting, Director for Space Application Programs as well. So there's a lot here to unpack, but yeah, maybe just about your role and the foundation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I was in Australia for the IAC a few years back, and I'm so excited by the commercial activity and what the government's doing there. It's such a vibrant space community. So it's wonderful to have this opportunity to talk with you today. When it comes to the Summit for Space Sustainability and what I do, which is kind of work on our Earth application programs, they actually kind of tie to each other. So Secure World Foundation is a nonprofit that focuses entirely on space sustainability. So kind of a unique mission. It's very broad and very specific at the same time in that we are interested in anything that we think will contribute to the long-term sustainability of space. So the idea that we want space to be secure, peaceful, and sustainable, something that we can benefit from for a long time. And that's kind of speaks to the why. I'm a space geek. I would love to do things in space just because I think they're cool. But the reality is that we derive a huge amount of benefit here on Earth from space activities, whether it's from satellite data, helping us to understand and respond to climate change, whether it's from transfer technologies and a better understanding of our universe that comes from scientific research and space exploration. I mean, the list is endless. And that's really why we care about space sustainability in the long run. If you don't think about that, then we could make some of the same mistakes in space that we could make on Earth. And as I'm sure your listeners know, the space world is changing. It is no longer the domain of just a few countries. And as it becomes more and more about new actors, as academia gets involved and does research, as small and medium-sized countries explore what kind of space capabilities they would like in Australia. That's changing as we speak.
I have heard the particularly when we're looking at the Mars and Moon missions as well, same problems, just a new planet. Do you think we're heading in the right direction rather than? There's also something else on the Foundation's website which I liked was the tragedy of the commons, where everyone's doing their kind of own thing. Do you think there's enough collective coordination around sustainability for space, or do you think that kind of the space race sort of puts sustainability aside and in order just to achieve those sort of missions, because so many countries are involved now? It's really good work that you're doing, but do you think it's actually heading in the right direction? And maybe a key question is, what is some of the real advances being made when we talk about sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, overall, I think it is heading in the right direction. And this is part of why we held the Summit for Space Sustainability. When my organization was founded, part of our goal was just to raise awareness about space sustainability. Back in the early 2000s and early 2010s, it was, there was less activity being planned for other planets. There was less commercial activity. And so really trying to raise awareness was what we needed to do then. But I would say that that's changed. And that's part of the reason why we host this event, where we're really trying to think about solutions and those next steps. There's not very many actors out there that are going to tell you nobody cares about space sustainability. It's kind of one of those, as we say in the United States, mom and apple pie topics.
Yeah.
On this surface, everybody is fairly committed to it. Now, what that actually looks like in practice is always a different question. So in general, yes, I think there is solid commitment from governments and other space actors to tackle these problems. Now, do I always think that they do it quickly enough or thoroughly enough, or are we getting out ahead of everything? No, of course not. We can always do better, and we need to do better. The problems will only get worse and worse if we don't. But what I do think is that there is a common belief that this is important. The understanding of the fragility of the space environment, the desire to conduct activities on Mars and the Moon in a way that is sustainable is generally universally held. So the question now is, okay, well, what does that actually mean for all of us? I mean, no one argues that space debris is not a problem and we should just ignore it. But now we have to come to an agreement. Okay, well, what does the data tell us? What should we actually be doing? How can we solve this? How can we fix the things we've already messed up and make sure that our new activities are managed in a way that's sustainable? So I am very hopeful in that sense. But I also would be, remiss if I didn't say, well, but the time is now.
Yeah.
That's why we host this event. That's why we focus on this, because if we don't do it now, it will balloon quite quickly.
What are some of the key incentives? Do you think there's you mentioned space junk. There's it's quite a commercial incentive now to find a solution to space junk, and there's some advances being made there. But what are some of the other incentives? Do you think maybe that aren't there yet, or should be there for companies? And as we see the privatization of space, that's another key aspect. It's not just governments now,
Mm.
but the privatization of space and the civil sector, is there enough incentive to be sustainable rather than that long-term thinking? But any observations around incentives?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say one incentive is the actual danger posed. We saw this. One of the big topics at our recent summit was talking about the increase recently in anti-satellite testing and the debris that those kinds of activities can cause, and the conjunctions that have absolutely happened because of those kinds of things. And that's just one example. So I think the actual risk and danger is well known and well understood, and certainly larger constellations are very concerned about that. And so their incentive is don't mess up our business case. We're trying to run a satellite constellation. It's not quite the same for smaller really small satellites, but even there is an overload of conjunction warning. So even if you aren't necessarily immediately going, your likelihood of actually getting hit with debris isn't high. That doesn't mean you're not dealing with the problem on a day-to-day basis, because conjunction warnings are continually growing out of control. So I think from company perspective, even if they didn't want to maintain a nice environment for the posterity's sake, it's just key to their business plans, to their expansion. But they're interested for both. Now, for governments, it's different. I think it's the same concern. I think we are all aware of, the ISS has had many close encounters with debris. You can see pictures of the damage on the internet. And so it's the same concept there, even if it's not driven by business, it's still the idea of threats to operation. But in addition to that, there is also this idea of actual responsibility. We really think that some of the incentives that need to be, pushed for and to find the right keys to turn is legacy debris as well. This isn't just about
Yeah.
not creating new debris, it's also about cleaning up what's already up there. And for that, it's mostly governments. It's mostly a very small number of governments that are responsible for that degree, that debris. And so figuring out how getting the technology in place, which is coming along incredibly quickly. If you'd asked me 5 years ago if we would be where we are, I would not have believed you.
Right.
I'm incredibly impressed with the number of companies that are doing very real, serious work at debris removal, and finding the ways to incentivize various governments as well as industry to take up that. I think, like I said, will come from practical considerations, but will also come from a desire to be responsible and to acknowledge, that we are the stewards of this environment.
What are some of the sort of fallbacks back to Earth as well when we look at sort of global warming and climate change? Do you think there's some takeaways there as well, or any links there between space sustainability and how humans live on Earth, as well as potentially how we live into the future on other planets? But yeah, just your or any sort of observations or key takeaways there on how we can bring the thinking about space sustainability back to Earth for our climate change challenge.
Yeah, it's definitely a two-way street. The two issues are incredibly linked. And as we talk about the dangers of space sustainability, we think debris is the obvious one, but there are many other things we could talk
Mm.
about. We can talk about space weather. We can talk about spectrum. We can talk about commercial best practice. We can talk about funding. I mean, there's a lot of things that affect
Yeah,
space sustainability. And the only reason anyone cares about that is because of this benefit that we derive on Earth. We aren't going to do this just for the sake of cool instruments. We have to understand and tie this to benefit. Governments understand that. We wouldn't understand climate change to the extent that we do without, government satellite data and now commercial satellite data. So that's the first thing, is that it's linked no matter what we do, because if we don't protect these assets and this data and we have a serious problem, then we are very much going to impact our own ability to address climate change and other problems on Earth. The flip side of that is like what we were talking about with the responsibility, right? So there's this idea that we need to be stewards of all of our environments, and we need to take the lessons from space and apply them to Earth, but also take the lessons from Earth and apply them to space. One area where we see a lot of really positive thinking is as companies, both terrestrial companies who don't necessarily have space as part of their main activity, but also space companies themselves, as they actually consider like ESG principles, right? So environmental social governance, and really thinking about what it means to be a responsible company in today's age. And that's really driven a lot by the climate crisis, right? And so it's exciting to see that. And what we would like to see is space sustainability to become part of those conversations. So for terrestrial companies to understand the value that they derive from space, which is almost guaranteed. There are very few industries out there, I can't even really name one, that isn't getting some benefit from space or couldn't possibly. And so having them incorporate and understand and be a champion for space sustainability and for the policies that are necessary is key. And then for space companies to make the same consideration and to apply their own rules to ourselves. I mean, are we good? Are we green companies? Are we doing the right thing? And the answer for now is mostly yes, but that could change. And so really just thinking about it in terms of this idea of sustainability writ large, right? Like I often have to make the distinction between space sustainability and Earth sustainability.
Yeah.
But the reality is the word means the same thing for a reason. And so really getting everyone involved to apply those principles to as many of their actions as they can.
I think you're right. There's a real opportunity there because if you look about any corporate supply chain, space or space-related, generated data will be there, and even down to the
Mm.
weather. It really there. So I think there is a real opportunity there, particularly in the ESG space or domain, to raise the profile there. Now, in terms of the summit, you've just come back from Paris for the IAC. Did you think that they sufficient? There's a good example of a global conference for space. Sustainability was on the agenda, I take it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we see this, like I said, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, it was getting anyone to care about any of these issues. That's not the case anymore. Now what we need to do is move beyond saying, okay, we have a problem, to, well, what are the actual solutions? Where can we take action tomorrow? Where can we take action in 10 years? How can we plan for this? I mean, it is not ridiculous to say that the technology is moving faster than the regulation. And regulation isn't the only answer here, not at all. Like that's a part of the solution. Having government step in and make sure that space activities are conducted in a reasonable way is absolutely one of the things that was discussed at IAC. It's discussed all the time. But it's not the only thing that's going to have to happen. I mean, a lot of this is going to be driven by industry, by their own self-interest, by and their desire to be good, good stewards, as we've been talking about. And we definitely saw that as well. I mean, even the IAC itself put an emphasis on sustainability this year, to the point where they got rid of carpets and, are really trying to think about our carbon footprint
Wow.
as an industry, just even for conferences. And so I do absolutely think that it's on the agenda. I think the question is, how quickly can we move, and can we all come to an agreement over what things mean? The US government's doing one thing, European governments are doing something else. And also, how can we support burgeoning space economies? I mean, we don't want to end up in a circumstance where we're in any way squashing industry or squashing the growth of new space agencies or countries that are looking to expand their space capabilities. That is not the point here. The point is just to do so in a responsible way. And I definitely see that as very much being under consideration, trying to make sure that the benefits of space reach everyone and are protected at the same time.
I think there's always the difficult part is applying common sense to it as well and creating the balance there. I'm also I would assume sustainability means different things to different people or to different countries as well. And
Mhm.
whether they abide by certain sort of rules or norms can also mean different things for different uh, people, I suppose. 2023 outlook, I think if we finish for that, you had your summit in June, and then we've just had the Paris event as well. What does 2023 look like for you, and what are some of the key events that you go for in terms of sustainability, in terms of raising that awareness, apart from the summit as well?
Absolutely. I mean, you're not at a loss in the space world for events, especially post-COVID. Everyone is so
Yeah.
excited. I'm actually gonna be in Asia for the APR staff, that's happening in Vietnam in November.
Okay.
We're very excited to reconnect with the Asia Pacific region, and so really looking at attending some of the events in that area. Um, there's always the big ones. So Symposium is always fun out in Colorado. We're going to be hosting our summit again next June, likely in New York. So we've got some really
Right.
interesting themes. And as you're talking about the 2023 outlook, and I'd highlight for your audience some of the things that I think are going to be big. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but anti-satellite testing is really raising a lot of concerns right now. But we're also seeing some very hopeful action. So the United States this year declared a moratorium on testing, and a number of countries, New Zealand, Germany, Japan, have joined them, which is incredibly exciting. And Secure World is absolutely looking to see more discussion on that. We talked about it at the summit, and now we're really looking to, bring in a variety of communities to support other countries joining that. I suspect Australia is on the docket. I have some insight there, but we're really looking to expand that to as many countries as we possibly can. I'm also interested in the public perception of space. One of the
Yeah.
big outcomes of this summit was we did a panel with some reporters and some public relations professionals and folks who deal with the public every day in their space jobs. And we're sort of questioning, we think our industry is really cool, but as we talk about things like climate change, I don't know that that's the case for the next generation. How we're perceived in the media, clickbait, the billionaire space race, despite its benefits, that's not really how it's portrayed
Yeah.
publicly. And so if we're going to talk about value, then I think that's another big theme for 2023 is, how we're perceived by the outside world, and making sure that we're doing our job to make that happen.
Well, I think things like fuel, yeah, I have seen that sort of pushback from sort of climate change activists
Mhm.
pushing back on the space sector, mainly around the launch, but we are looking at sort of that sustainable launch capability as well. But things like fuel and the like, it's always going to be a difficult one to get, given the power required to get off the planet in the first place. But I think, things like what we're seeing from NASA in terms of the moon and the Mars, some of the insights I've had to that, you think there is some hope that we won't make the same mistakes, even though they may well have started to. We still, that's the other thing with space. It's a bit of a legacy industry as well, right? There's a lot of
Mhm.
material up there that we've put up there from over decades. So that change is only happening over the last sort of 10 or 20 years, but space has been going on for much longer than that. So I think that's one of the other key challenges. So Krystal Azelton, the Director, Space Applications Programs and the Secure World Foundation Summit for Space Sustainability Chair. Best of luck for New York. Hopefully we can get there. If we get an invitation, we're happy to be media partners with you, but at least raise awareness for this very important topic. So thank you very much for joining us on Australia in Space TV.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I don't know if you heard, but the IAC is actually returning to Australia in 2025. Couldn't be more excited about making my way back over there in person, hopefully a little sooner as well. But yeah, it's been great to get to know you guys. And I encourage you and your audience to reach out to us. We're a nonprofit. We're always here to answer questions, talk about these topics. So, the door is open anytime.
Wonderful. We'll have some links for the website and the summit in the show notes as well. But Krystal, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.